This is Willpower.
I'm excited to be here. Willpower podcast, Caleb Greer, Dasein Health.
Got it.
And I thought this was a necessary sit down for me, for my audience, for sure. And just because I have so much love for you and this whole organization you've created and crafted. I just want to start out by saying it's the most baller for anyone who's in like Texas. It's the most baller medical practitioner facility I've ever come to. And, outside of the circles of being around you, I think I say that I'm like, oh, Caleb Greer, he's a cowboy, which isn't always the way. I mean, we're in Texas, so maybe you're a cowboy. And it's really about risk so much as about innovation and listening. Such an active listener. So I want to open the whole conversation on this podcast with just flattering you so that you give me all the good answers on female physiology.
Thank you.
And and the tools that you have in this facility. So I want to get the little elevator speech for what's going on inside this building, because I know that you are working with a different practice. You broke out on your own, and just what was the impetus for that, and tell people how badass it is here.
Yeah. So the gist of it was really to generate a space where people could come and kind of have everything in one place to minimize the excuses for not doing what they know they should be doing, right? And so getting software and hardware that could simplify the process of resistance training and, overall health and wellness and optimization, that was the kind of goal. So when I first started in practice, it was really kind of focused on integrative medicine, and that was really it. So clients would come in, we'd kind of work out some of their physiology and try to get them subjectively feeling better and then objectively getting better via blood work and anything else diagnostically that we're doing. But then, of course, with the functional medicine side of things, talking about nutrition and exercise and sleep, it's very hard to follow up with people in a manner that can actually, augment or facilitate their movement in the direction that they want to go. So the idea when I kind of spread out and did my own thing was to have that fundamental piece where the mainstay of improving physiology was still there, but then to also allow people to come in and, train with the ARX machines and use hyperbaric and use IV therapy, all the different tools that are available to really speed up that process of getting as healthy as possible, to where the opportunity cost wasn't so high that they can't do anything else that they love. So again, it's minimally effective doses for all the things that are going to make them optimal beings, and then freeing up time to do everything else that they want to do that they may otherwise have missed out on because they have to exercise for a certain amount of time, or they have to go and, meal prep and do all these different things that, obviously take time, and time is the most valuable resource, I feel like, especially in this day and age.
Yeah, for sure. And I've never been in a facility before where somebody has said, usually I'm the weirdo who's bringing in all the things, right? I read this, I saw this, and there's a level of, I wouldn't say frustration, but when I've worked with like doctors or functional medicine people in the past, it's like really about building that relationship. And I would say that I don't know what percentage of your clients are bringing in all the crazy stuff, but it gives us permission to say, hey, I read this, I heard this, and all those pieces, and have you layer on. Typically you layer on your expertise, and you're like, well, A through Y, that's all incorrect, but this one piece is a component that really works, So are you seeing that a lot of people showing up saying, you already have some innovation, I love because you have an ice bath here, you've got red light here, you've got ARX here, and really that full tilt piece of medicine. Are you feeling like other people show up and do the same thing as I do? They bring you all the crazy gear?
For sure. And that's, again, part of listening and really making sure to kind of have that humility and understand that when I have a conversation with somebody, it's not this authoritative position that I hold over people. It's really, you come to the table with what you have to, say and offer, and I can listen to that and kind of use my patterns and expertise to kind of facilitate and guide moving forward with the suggestions. But, ultimately, when people bring me things that one I haven't heard of or to have heard of but not really explored, it gives me more of an impetus to go and actually research those things and see, especially if they have anecdotes that are super helpful, to say, okay, well, there's maybe not a strong literature to suggest that this is, a double-blinded, placebo-controlled intervention to utilize in practice. But, if this one person says that this tool improved their subjective well-being to a significant degree, I listen to that and, kind of explore, well, what does that look like to bring into practice? How many other people could enjoy that kind of modality? And also within the membership model that I have, most of the toys that I bring on are included in the membership. So there's not really a fee added on to use those things. So I can really explore, hey, guys, come use this therapy and see, does it work? Is it beneficial?
Yeah.
And if it's not, it's no skin off. There's no financial risk for them. And I get more data to actually suggest further on, hey, this is a very unique tool that can be beneficial. And then you can spread that information across to the different streams of practitioners and other people that kind of want those tools available.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so great. The cascade of changes that even I've seen in my body and some of the ways that we're working together have been really helpful for me. And I think the other thing to talk about, so we want to talk about female physiology, and all of the impetus for this is a newsletter you sent out that was, I don't know, 9 pages long. And I was like, I'm devouring this. It's amazing to be able to get your knowledge. It sounds like that wouldn't be succinct, but the reality is everything you covered was these succinct snippets around female physiology and fertility. I think that was really the focus of the newsletter, which is something that, just as a women's health coach, women write me, and my DMs are not filled with like boys asking me on dates. My DMs are filled with women asking me about vaginal health and sexual issues and fertility and ways that they can course correct, because there are a lot of stressors that are being, self-imposed in some way because they like want to do the thing that they either, they really want a child, or society is really pushing on them to be a certain way, skinny, et cetera. And so those things come up quite often. I want to talk in the female physiology sense too, just about some of the tools that you have here, because you have some background with physique transformation and really taking good care of yourself, as we can see.
Yeah.
And do you want to just talk a little bit about why and how that branched your capacity to be able to talk about physical fitness, strength training, and, working with the females that come in here who are clients of yours? Because the last, 5 medical practitioners I've worked with probably I've always been more fit than they are. And that's a differential, right?
Yeah.
In many ways.
Yeah. I mean, so again, going back to the kind of fundamentals of longevity and health span, muscle mass, bone density are 2 major things, especially as we kind of go through that perimenopausal and menopausal transition. Not we, but women in general, right? And so figuring out how to manipulate hormones to make people feel better is one thing. And you're going to get a massive improvement in subjective well-being. But if they're not, again, doing the right nutritional strategies, they're not doing the right exercise strategies, and not sleeping well, like there's still a wide gamut for improvement there. And the conventional thought process behind exercise for women, I think is just kind of, I don't want to say it's incorrect. I just don't think it's optimal, especially per training through your cycle and making sure, doing resistance training for the first half when estrogen's high and your ligaments are going to be stretched, and not doing dynamic stuff and risking your ACL tears and ligamentous injury. But the main, I guess, impediment to women's strength training is, expertise, just not growing up in a space where they were doing Olympic lifts or powerlifting or getting exposed to moving heavy things in a safe manner. And then also just not having the time to devote to learning those techniques and to really doing it well. And then not having someone to help them out and spot and do those kinds of things where, guys can go to the gym and just ask the bro to spot them out, right? Women just don't have that same kind of confidence in terms of, I really know what I need to do. That's a problem. And then if I do know what I need to do I have the support to actually do that? Especially with, my older clients that are already postmenopausal and haven't done it forever. So really interjecting the need for resistance training, but then bridging that gap to them being able to do what I want them to do. That's where the ARX machines have come in so handy, because it's intimidating to move a lot of weight, and it's intimidating from a risk perspective and not wanting to hurt themselves and get the maximum benefit at the same time. So, again, kind of going back to the original question, how did I really want to move to promote exercise as a modality for health span? And, obviously with exercise physiology as a developing science and kind of moving away from, more activity is not necessarily better, but figuring out the activity that's going to give you most bang for your buck for VO2 max increase in strength and bone density. That's really where kind of shifting the model around chronic cardio and, aerobic training and, steady state stuff into heavy resistance training and HIIT in a manner that's not just bursting with cortisol and actually helping the recovery patterns and helping, get glucose disposal and insulin sensitivity up with more skeletal muscle mass. That's really where the transition came in, as far as helping not just women, but men too, kind of figure out that it's not going to make you the Hulk. It's not going to make you super bulky. It's not going to make you anything but lean and be able to have a more liberal dietary consumption too, as far as carbs and fat, and that whole dietary, dogma around what to eat is also another picture.
And mood. Like, I don't know if you see this as much as I feel this all the time. It's like when the day or two that goes by that I'm not pushing weight, and when I go to push weight, I always leave the gym like, you need to be doing that every day. It's not about overtraining. It's about just like there's an essential balancing of my mood, my stress level, all those pieces. So
when
really
just doing
beautiful.
difficult things. I mean, it's just the kind of the same benefit you get from voluntary exposure to stress in the ice bath. It's a similar kind of dopaminergic pursuit to not only see gains every week, and it's just kind of this facilitator of, hey, I'm on the right trajectory. But there's also just something to feeling like you accomplished a feat that was extremely difficult. With the ARX machine, it's impossible really to not feel that, because the machine is essentially doing all the work for you and you just resist. Yeah.
And so safely. Yeah. Super fan of ARX.
Yeah.
Interviewed the team and really love the work on it. So let's talk a little bit more about hormones and females. I think it's a long winding path. I briefly, you and I talked about Vasper systems, this cooling HIIT training thing that I've used in the past in LA. And really the first exposure I had to this statement, which was really our hormones don't decline because we age because our hormones decline. I think there's sort of two parts to the puzzle of females and hormones. And the first part is WTF, where's the rule book? I've been to lots of, not shy to talk about it in some ways, but I've been to lots of different people over the last 5-7 years of my life to talk about fertility and balancing my hormones and what's going on in my body, and could I make a baby, and do I still have eggs, and all these things. And I've consistently been pretty taken aback by others who recommend experts in the area who then sort of throw everything at the wall to see what sticks. So there's a balancing of the hormones conversation, I think, as well as an aging and hormones piece. And so what is your approach when someone first shows up and it's like, a woman is like, I don't know. We all walk into offices quite often. You see this perhaps where we're like, I think my hormones are out of whack. I don't know. What do I do? Right. And there's that's such a blanket statement. So for women who are listening to this or watching this, wondering what, I think my hormones are unbalanced, or how do I tell, or they're just saying that story, we tell them ourselves, what's the trajectory? What's next steps for you with your clients or with women who are lost in the sauce?
Yeah. So collecting good history in terms of their menstrual past is super helpful, because number one, age at menarche, when they actually have their first period, the symptoms around that, did they use birth control in their adolescence? And then using that data kind of suggest, were those certain contraceptives helpful? Is there a certain one that, was better, worse, and kind of use the type of, contraceptive that was in that pill to kind of suggest, okay, this was more estrogen based, this was more progestin based. You didn't do well with this, mix, but you did well with this mix. And that can kind of help guide whether this is going to be something that's responsive to progesterone or estrogen, or if we have to cycle it throughout, their actual phases. But figuring out what are they presenting with, just listening, right? I feel like I'm super moody. I feel like, my vaginal mucosa is getting dry, sex is painful, or my libido is kind of tanking, but nothing else is wrong. So really just kind of siloing the symptoms and then putting it together in a cohesive picture, having that as the backdrop of data, getting blood work just one spot, either it's in the follicular phase or the luteal phase, if they know where they are. So tracking is another thing that I have very difficult time with clients, because hardly any any are tracking their stuff.
Why is that? What's that
I
about?
don't know.
Ladies,
it
women,
kind of,
whatever terminology you want to use. If you are a female, if you have a female physiology and you're having a cycle, a reproductive, a monthly cycle, can we just remind everyone, there's so many ways to track it.
Yeah. And even if you track it for 3 months, if you have a consistent pattern that you can then, relay that information to somebody, it's really beneficial from a practitioner's perspective, because we're not starting from ground zero.
Yeah.
So, when we have someone who thinks it's a hormonal imbalance, okay, great. It may very well be. It's a very low hanging fruit. So, we'll get our initial blood work, and we want to make sure that we know the date of the menstrual cycle that's drawn on, so we can put it into global context. The problem with blood testing is it's one snapshot. And you've got 28 days of altering hormonal activity if you have a normal cycle. God forbid it's 34, 36 days. So in that context, we have a tool that we use. It's the Anito. It's a urine tracker. So basically it spits out.
It's amazing.
LH.
I don't know. It's like, I'm like, what's the deal? Caleb's telling me the new shit that I don't even know about. So it's amazing.
Yeah.
At home.
Yeah. No, so at home, super easy. You know, it's a urine test. You get the sticks that come with it. And then you just, first urine void, you pop the stick in there, you put it in your phone, and it kind of reads out LH, FSH, progesterone, and estradiol. They're urinary metabolites, so it's not the exact blood analyte, but the ratios and everything are pretty appropriate. And with that, you know, we can do a month of tracking, 2 months of tracking, whatever it kind of takes to get an understanding of what their cycle is doing. And then we can really pick and choose places where things are deficient or, you know, supra optimal above where they should be at a certain point, and then augment the cycle for their nuanced physiology so that we're not just blanketing progesterone for the whole cycle. We're not just doing it for luteal phase. It might just be the first week after where they need support with progesterone. So, you know, moving from that, and then again, listening to them the whole way through, the other benefit of the concierge model is they can email me kind of whenever they experience something new. They don't have to wait 2 or 3 months to come and follow up and say, yeah, I started to notice that, you know, my boobs were getting really sore. I started to retain weight. And I'm like, well, you should have emailed me as soon as it started to happen. So now everyone is doing that, and we can course correct on a much quicker turnaround and make sure to reduce suffering as much as possible while we're figuring out a very complex, you know, scenario.
Yeah. And with the Anito or with anything that women maybe, because, you know, you can also track on Clue. You can track just based on, I got my period, let's count the days, mood, discharge. There's a lot of good settings in these either free or low cost apps as well. Although I love Anito because it's a little more like science interesting. And I'm like, what's happening in my body? And we spoke before we turned on the camera about how there's like cups of pee all over my house. It's so glamorous to have friends over. But it's so easy. But like, what are the implications when someone's like taking birth control even, or trying to work that in? Is that going to are the readings on Anito going to show up differently according to that birth control that's correlated to what they're taking? Yes
and no. So with oral contraceptives in the classical sense, if it's got, you know, a synthetic estradiol or a progestin, that's going to kind of level out LH and FSH. So really the point to using those contraceptives are to essentially inhibit the brain's communication with the ovary. So the ovary never develops, you know, a mature follicle, and you don't get ovulation. Now you're still getting some receptor saturation from the synthetic hormones, even if they don't show up in the blood. So if you do a blood test on a contraceptive and estradiol is super low and progesterone is super low, that doesn't reflect what's happening on a tissue level. So it's not, you know, it's not wise to tell someone, oh, the contraceptives are just bottoming out your hormones. Like, yes, endogenous production is super low because you're not having the stimulus to make more, but you're still getting some saturation. That's why on an oral contraceptive, you're not necessarily going to get hot flashes and symptoms of menopause because you're getting some kind of tissue saturation. In terms of tracking with the Anito in blood and everything else, you're not going to get a normal picture because you're not ovulating. So we're not expecting really anything to change. But when people come off of the oral contraceptives, it becomes really helpful because then we can see how long does it take for your cycle to re-regulate? How long does it take for those, you know, oocyte pools to get pulled in and to get developed? And then, you know, we can track, would it take 2 months to start ovulating again? Did it take 3 months to start ovulating again? And then in terms of kind of planning out for fertility, that's super helpful too, because, you know, it takes like 75 to 90 days for that original pool of oocytes to develop into a primary oocyte that can be taken through the follicular maturation process. So a lot of women think, you know, I'll get off the oral contraceptives and then start trying, you know, in the next month or two, when in reality, you might release an egg that's not really up to snuff as far as the best biological value that you could get from an egg. So I always kind of counsel. People
still get pregnant, I'm sure, that way, right?
It's just in terms of, you want the best egg quality as possible, and you want to give it that full 90-day cycle with hormonal milieu that's going to be conducive to, again, the best quality of oocyte.
And what is, like, let's just widen the playing field on contraceptive, because I think there's a lot of, well, you said you're seeing some of this, you've spoken to me about before that you see some of this like contraceptive confusion. And then also, I sort of have a little bit of whether it's the stigma or I've just started to have a distaste for it. Just, you know, I spent 20 years on oral contraceptive in my life, and starting as a very young woman, because I went to the doctor and was like, oh, I'm breaking out or whatever. And then it wasn't really, at like 15 or 16 years old, I didn't have the wherewithal to say, okay, like, is this good for my body? Or what is this? It's just a white lab coat, person in a white lab coat tells you to do it. And you think, okay, that's a fine answer. And 20 years of it, and then coming off of it and trying NuvaRing and trying other different types of contraceptive, and then just really realizing, and like you and I probably had this in a consult where I talked to you about Depo-Provera and how it made me an insane person. And so again, different for everyone, but like an insane person, and like it's in you for 30 days. It doesn't wash in one day out of you. And so I finally really got to the place where I was like, this is not for me. Like I have to figure out a way, the rhythm method or whatever, where I know when I'm ovulating and I'm not on birth control. It made me a whole different person. And all the studies that exist out there are women who are like on oral contraceptive or other contraception. And then they like go off of it and then they're like no longer interested in their partner anymore. This has happened to plenty of clients of mine where they're shifting birth control. Look, it doesn't mean you're going to like leave your man, leave your woman, whatever, but they go off of birth control and then there's like a different draw for what they're attracted to. And so I have a little bit of a resistance to wanting to have, I think, oral contraceptive more than anything, because I took that for so long and it made me feel so terrible.
Yeah.
But just what's the playing field on that? Like, is there a safe way to put a little bit of hormone in that feels better than another? Or do you feel like all of it can be great? It just depends on your body or? Yeah,
so it really depends on the goal of the contraceptive, right? So if it's for acne or endometriosis or cramps or something like that, and not for fertility management or for actual contraception, that's a different conversation. So if someone's using it symptomatically, we can actually start to kind of peel the layers back and see, well, do you have too much DHEA? Is there just too much androgen? Are you overweight with a PCOS kind of presentation? Is it insulin sensitivity thing? So we can kind of, again, peel the layers back. They're still taking their oral contraceptive, but kind of figure out if we can do something else, like maca or something to help balance out that hormonal milieu. Use inositol for ovarian sensitivity and insulin signaling. So in that spectrum, there are way more options than just using a pill that will kind of flatten out the hormones to where you're kind of robbing Peter to pay Paul. You could get away with it, you could not. But again, I see most of the long-term effects of OCPs, oral contraceptives, kind of 8 to 10 years after starting them, when you've been devoid of progesterone and ovulation signal for so long that it kind of manifests as anxiety and some mood changes and just like even trouble sleeping. And so that's kind of like a home run for me when I see someone out of nowhere just start to get more anxious, poor sleep, and some mood changes, to pull them off the contraceptives, get the progesterone back up to kind of give them that neurosteroid derivative that helps them relax and get somewhat of a biological Xanax to where they're just even keeled. And then we can deal with the other hormonal symptoms on top of that, whether it's kind of a low level continuous progesterone to either, promote some of the symptom management. But when it comes to contraception, that's a different story, because if they number one, can't track their hormones, or if they can't track their menstrual cycle and they don't know where they are, they can use the cervical mucus as an indicator for ovulation. But even then it might be too late, because by the time that happens, you're still kind of in that fertile window to where if you had sex before that, there's still a likelihood that you would get pregnant. So that's where kind of having an established pattern is super helpful. Day 14 or 15, I start to get my changes. So now I'm going to say day 13, we're going to cut it off or use condoms or use something else to like really make sure that none of the Spartans get the victory.
If we don't want to get pregnant.
Yeah, if you don't want to get pregnant. Climbing the walls. But in terms of using a different contraception, when people are just like, I don't want to get pregnant, I don't want to risk it, I don't want to think about it, then really going the route of the IUD is a much better route, because it doesn't actually inhibit ovulation. It just kind of makes the uterus inhospitable for implantation. Mm-hmm. So, when women are on the Mirena or Skylar, even the copper IUD, you can still track all the hormones and they're actually what they would have been before. But if you ovulate and you get pregnant, or the sperm manages to kind of get, to manage fertilization, it won't implant. And so this is also the ethical consideration with people that have a religious background of, once fertilization happens, like that's a life.
Yeah.
So with that demographic, we can't use the IUD because there is still a chance of that kind of pseudo abortion happening.
Yeah.
post fertilization.
And you still have your period. I think it's like with clients, sometimes it like disappears altogether, or sometimes they still have a lighter version and then they take the IUD out. So I've never had an IUD.
Yeah. So usually it'll stop the cycle after like 3 or 4 months. And sometimes bleeding is worse just because there's something in there and it's kind of a foreign body. So there's definitely considerations. I'd say about 25% of my clients have issues with the IUD as far as insertion goes. And they'll either have to switch it out or do a different one or just kind of change the mode. But generally speaking, it will stop.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you have your recommendations on like long-term use? You think it's good like every 5 years to kind of switch out, take out, give your body a breather from I recognize some people don't want to get pregnant and that's cool, but giving your body a breather from a hormonal standpoint, because it feels to me like it's blunting a lot of things over the course of time.
Oral contraceptive or IUD wise?
I want to say both. I don't know. Oral contraceptive, I think, just taking a pause from having something either in your body or something that is exogenous to get to see what's going on. Like I have some clients now I can just even think of that are like, hey, I might be perimenopausal, or I don't know, I just turned 48 and I don't even know what my period is doing. I've had an IUD in for 5-7 years, whatever. It's like, let's have I'm not always in a place to medically make recommendations, right? It's not exactly my wheelhouse, but I say, let's speak with your doctor and see if this is something that you'd feel comfortable getting your body back, like figuring out where your body actually is right now in space and time so that you can treat the reality of what's either happening or not happening. Like maybe everything is fine. But
yeah. That happens actually quite a bit. So people, especially after they've had the last child that they want to have and they're kind of going through like, I don't want to get pregnant. Mm-hmm. They're postpartum, they kind of get on a regimen. And then after a few years, they're like, things are definitely weird now. Like it's not as good as it was. I know I got on this because I didn't want to get pregnant, but now I'm having all these other issues. Getting them off is definitely a medical supervised thing because they're emailing within a week of like new things that are happening. They're having breakthrough bleeding. They're having super bad cramps. I mean, so getting someone off of an oral contraceptive is a bit of work. And it really takes that ahead of time communication to say, look, this could go great or it could be a nightmare. But if it's a nightmare, you have access and we can just figure these things out. Here's plan 1, here's plan 2, here's plan 3. So really kind of laying out the expectations is the number one strategy in terms of getting someone off of oral contraceptives. But, my goal, within the integrative medicine space is to have no one on oral contraceptive. I would say the one area that's not what I try to do is with endometriosis, because it's so hard to manage without some kind of underlying hormonal blocker. Mm-hmm. But outside of that, there's really no need for an oral contraceptive because we have so many other better strategies to figure out and how to use. It just takes more time. So it's definitely something where by the time someone comes here, like, I don't care how long it takes, we're just going to do the right thing. And, that's the buy-in.
Yeah. Yeah. So the things that I've heard you say that I think are important standouts, I want to repeat out loud, are like, you don't need to, like, hormonal testing is important, especially when everything feels normal. Like I would assume once a year for a woman so that there's some mirror you can look in to say, this is what normal felt like for a couple years.
Yes.
So hormonal testing, and then also understanding like the use and variant of contraception according with, I talk about this a lot with everything I do, context, mm-hmm. right? Context to the person's physiology, where they are, what their goals are, just really understanding that. And, I would always also say too, like, I don't have to do this with you, but like quite often it's like a second opinion. Because people have, like I've mentioned, people have sent me before to other different like hormone specialists or just fertility experts. And the reality is like I got the wonderful luck of the draw and being able to be introduced to you through Natalie Nidham and just saying, okay, cool. This is someone who really understands my female physiology in total. I can have those conversations with you.
Yeah.
So just, speaking about that, I want to stay on the exogenous hormones thing because I think that this is another thing that continues to come up as people are riding this, which is like HRT. Like we've sort of established that there are some medical conditions or reasons that women would put contraceptive or exogenous hormones in their body to be able to balance out their baseline or, get back to good or whatever that might be. But there's another part of life where there's a lot of discourse around, hey, this is unsafe or this is safe. And that's in the world of HRT. So hormone replacement therapy. And specifically with women who are like riding that line of either early perimenopause, and even going into menopause. What is the case to be made for hormone replacement therapy? It's very, I already have an opinion on it. I'm pretty pro hormone replacement therapy. People should do what they want with their bodies. But for me, I feel like it's a thing that gives me a better landscape into what my future holds, and then also, longevity and overall well-being. But from an HRT perspective, sort of what are you seeing out there, risks involved, and are you an advocate of it more often than not?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a huge advocate for kind of, number one, maintaining reproductive fitness throughout the aging years, even though you're not technically reproductively fit. So, when it comes to my philosophy around health span and longevity, essentially from an organismal perspective, like you want to take the best years of your life and live those into later years. Men obviously have a much easier and better time with that just because we're not built to have that reproductive clock in the same way that women are. And so I feel like it's been a great disservice to kind of use men as the overall pool of evidence to kind of suggest that, if women go through menopause, that's a natural course of things, like you should just let it happen. Well, most of that kind of recommendation came from men that, number one, didn't have an appreciation for how shitty that transition is and for the quality of life that women will have after that period of time. So, after the whole Women's Health Initiative study came out in the early 2000s, the big scare tactic with breast cancer and the risk of that with one particular group in that study really kind of made everyone who had access to prescribing hormones in an antithetical position. And then all the women were also on the same side of it. It was like, okay, well, yeah, I have hot flashes, I'm not sleeping well, my mood's crazy, my libido sucks, but I also don't want breast cancer. Mm-hmm. So I think
it was everywhere. That notion was everywhere.
Yeah. And I think having that conversation with people, really helping them understand what that risk was and where it came from and how it's really not relative to either transdermal or vaginal replacement or even creams or even oral estradiol. Like that whole conversation was just bastardized and thrown in with the results of the study. And now that all those results have kind of been sleuthed out and overturned and given better context, it's really a re-education role to come in and say, you're going to be better off with the hormone levels that you had in a cycling perspective as your whole life, or at least from menarche until 40s and 50s. And so, my position on hormone replacement is to, number one, reduce suffering in the here and now for whoever's in front of me, right? And if that's getting rid of hot flashes and getting rid of vaginal dryness and making their sex life enjoyable again, that's my number one concern. It doesn't matter if they're 10 years post-menopause, right? So even the position statement from the obstetrics community has said, after 10 years of menopause, you don't start HRT because the risk of heart attack and stroke and everything else kind of goes up. Again, putting that into context for people, helping them understand that was in context of oral synthetic contraceptives with Premarin and, Provera or medroxyprogesterone, and then helping them understand the new data that kind of shows that 1 year of increased risk for heart disease and stroke is because of this physiology that happens with the withdrawal of estrogen for that 10 years. And that was just with oral estradiol. So it hasn't been shown with transdermal or vaginal or really alternative methods of administration. But, again, when it comes to risk management and that benefit risk analysis, everyone hands down is like, I would rather risk this 0.05% increase in breast cancer for getting rid of these other distressing symptoms. And, that conversation is not, okay, if you do this, you're going to get breast cancer. It's, you do this, you're going to feel better. You have a much better time of exercising and sleeping and having a better social life and having everything just kind of fall into place. And then, we can do MRIs on a yearly basis to make sure that there's no changes in the breast tissue. We can do all this other checkup, as far as their family history goes. If they have, different gene proclivities to get breast cancer, uterine cancer, other reproductive cancers. And really that's all you have to do. So you mitigate the potential downsides and you mitigate the potential downsides of the hormone therapy itself as far as the symptoms you could get from, having too much estrogen or too much progesterone. And then you just map it out. And as that person is telling you, I'm doing better, I'm doing better, I'm doing better, I'm doing better, you're still not forgetting the possibility in the background that, you could have a proclivity for cancer.
Yeah.
And so again, it's just making sure that you have somebody walking you through this and being your Sherpa and actually making sure we're going to do a liquid biopsy once a year, and see, are there any cell-free DNA indicators? And if there are, we can go get our diagnostic workup. So, really it's just kind of having a whole comprehensive look around, if this happens, here's what we'll do. If this happens, here's what we'll do.
Yeah.
And really just
educate.
And
it's like the advocacy I think a client comes to you with, and the advocacy you have. And the reminder for me is like, we have to stand at the forefront of our own health, right? And ask the questions, because maybe people are fortunate enough to be able to come here to you, and maybe they're in a wash of a few different medical practitioners, and it's like repeatedly asking the questions and not feeling like, oh, I'm not smart enough to get this, or I can't figure it out, or I think that's just such a stance we have to take for our own health, right? It's like the reason you and I do a lot of the work we do is because we're like, take a stance for your health in a way that feels like you are autonomous and you're in charge of it. And even if you're like, I have 100 questions, just ask them anyway.
Yeah.
I think quite often, asking the question, even if it's received in an odd way, which certainly it has for me across the years of my life with, things going on in my body, you just keep asking the question. So let's turn the conversation to fertility a bit. I have, a couple girlfriends right now who are really all different ages, even just like struggling across the board to figure out like what's the best way. Maybe they've had a miscarriage. Maybe they've had, just repeated attempts at getting pregnant, either the natural way or IVF, or, and there's a lot of stress. There's a lot of emotionality that goes along with that, as we can expect. I just want to talk about sort of that, and maybe, a few key things that you think really speak to what could be going wrong in the fertility. I know we're talking about a general population of women, but things that you see showing up a lot that are, I'm always reminded of the story where there's some couple that's like, well, we can't figure it out. And they like finally adopt a baby, and the baby comes and it's 2 years old. And then like 2 weeks later, she's like, oh my God, I'm pregnant.
Yeah.
And so I want to sort of talk to managing infertility challenges, or, fertility challenges to be able to make a baby.
For sure. So, obviously there's the biological reasons that someone on both sides, right? So you have to kind of put equal weight on both partners. And I think a lot of women take the burden on themselves without having their partner do a semen analysis and make sure before they even go through this rigmarole of IVF and everything, what does the partner's, sperm look like? Is it something that could just easily be managed on their side? And then,
because there's things men can do as well, I'm assuming, to be able to really like make their sperm robust.
For sure. Yeah, there's plenty of things to augment production and motility, and morphology is really hard to figure out. But that being said, kind of moving the dial back to women, on a biologic side of thing, age is going to be the number one factor that kind of comes into play, solely because, the DNA damage and everything that you build up to the point of when you try to have a child is always going to be there. So making sure from an environmental perspective, you're doing everything you can to facilitate a internal milieu or environment that is balanced in inflammation, balanced in oxidation and antioxidation, and making sure that, your vessel is appropriately fit to have a child is really the number one thing that I see getting in the way of people having a successful fertility kind of program. So when I have someone that comes in and they're overweight and they have insulin insensitivity, or they're metabolically ill, and they're like, I want to have a baby, like that's my goal. And it takes a very honest conversation to kind of take a step back and say, look, even if you do manage to get pregnant, it's not going to be the best that you could otherwise have had if we take more of an approach of making you well and focusing on your stress management and your internal milieu of inflammation and stress. And that time period is also giving them space to work on themselves. And again, by the time they get to a point where like, I'm looking better, I'm feeling better, I'm sleeping better, my relationship is better, the fertility just, it increases just as, a second to that improvement, not even to what we're doing for ovarian quality, in and of itself. So we get to the point where all of the physiologic barriers are kind of removed. We work on their water systems to make sure the purified, fluoride and all the different toxins that can come from our water systems, making sure that their beauty products are kind of phthalate free and all these different things that can be endocrine disruptors, making sure they're not consuming alcohol to really any degree, but if they are, to kind of manage that in their expectations. Obviously smoking and tobacco use can be a negative impact factor there too. But And then nutrition is kind of the last one that I would say in that.
But also it's the one
regard.
that I was most shocked about in reading your newsletter. It talked about metabolism and how like the way, like it does make sense because insulin and managing that, but it's just not, I didn't think to myself, oh, that's a natural 2 and 2 like equals 4.
Yeah. Well, and again, like PCOS, the polycystic ovarian syndrome, is kind of the penultimate example there. It's like, if you have inappropriate insulin sensitivity, and that's going to manipulate the hormones that get made in the ovarian follicular cells, that's why they have this hyperandrogen picture. That's why they have this visceral fat deposition, and then more inflammation is going to come from that and just kind of feed back on ovarian quality or oocyte quality. So really making sure to the greatest degree that we can that what they're doing that they can control is laid out in the best way possible. And then, if things still aren't working out or their hormones are still kind of out of whack, then we can kind of support the different phases based on what we see with the anedo and, say, look, your ovulation is actually 3 days after your LH spike, or it's 4 or 5 days after. Or then when you ovulate, your progesterone is not getting nearly high enough to augment the actual implantation. So then we'll start progesterone just at that time. But you don't know that unless you know. So if you're doing an ovarian predictor kit or something else, it just kind of shows you your LH spike. Then, or if you have PCOS and your LH is always high, it's going to deviate from what's actually physiologically necessary to ovulate and get pregnant.
Yeah. Yeah. I'll make sure that I put a link to anedo in the show notes because I'm going to be like, what is this thing? I need to know more about it. Yeah. Supplementation. I'm taking 60 pills a day, supplements, not including probably the 3 things that you've said to me. This is what you should take, Kristen, but you can go ahead and take those other 60 tablets.
There's so much to do.
But it's like females and supplementation. Is there something that is, across the board that you think is like the beginning of the answer, or the thing that generally speaking, most women are like lacking on? There's a lot of conversation right now about zinc. There's conversation. I always talk about magnesium and some of the basics, but are there things that women should be taking for either hormonal health or, cycle health that can bolster the way that we feel, the way that we're doing things?
Yeah. So I think some of it's going to be dependent. Like I would say across the board that everyone should make sure that they have enough of is going to be, EPA and DHA. So the omega-3 fatty acids, and that can come from fish, intake or from supplementation. Vitamin D is going to be another one. And then really maca. I'm really still not sure how to pronounce it the right way. But, as far as a, reproductive adaptogen, I think it's just really solid across the board. If you use, a brand that has the kind of delineation of the phenotypes of the actual roots that are conducive to, premenopausal, kind of peri, and then post, because there's different blends that are effective in managing those different kinds of symptoms.
But still also okay to take maca during regular parts of your reproductive years.
Mm-hmm.
But it will affect your hormonal profile.
Yeah, so it kind of just...
Because it's all over the place. It's like in protein shakes, and everyone's like, my green smoothie has, 4 cups of maca in it.
Yeah, so that being said, like using an extract versus using like a maca like powder is going to be different in terms of the potency of like the actual ingredients within it that are the adaptogen source. So it's like, eating an ashwagandha plant versus getting an extract of withanolide, at 35%. So that's going to be different when people put a scoop of maca in their protein shake versus getting a supplement that's actually derived for the purpose of reducing or augmenting, the physiology. So I would definitely kind of split that into supplementing maca as a health kind of additive versus using it as a tool to, basically use as an adaptogen for reproductive fitness.
Just an important distinction because it's all over the grocery store shelves. And I think you're the first person who said to me, like, there's 23 different signs or something, and they're all doing different things. And it has to be the right. And I'm just like, maca, okay, it makes me sweaty. I don't know what it is.
Well, and so that's the point too, right? So if you've got black maca, like that's more of a male stimulant than it is for female. So that's, for someone who is low on testosterone, low on libido, like they might benefit from more of a black maca. But generally speaking, like you're going to want yellow and red as far as like female reproductive fitness is going. And someone fact check me on that if I'm wrong. So so again, as kind of a general schematic, if there's hormone imbalances, I think maca is a really good way to just start out and see, hey, does this kind of level out the cramps? Does it level out any symptoms that you're experiencing? You can also use it as somewhat of a ovulation promoter in the first half of the cycle. So in the follicular phase, post-menses, You can kind of use it almost like Clomid as far as kind of promoting gonadotropin release. And so that's one method you can do kind of for 5 days in that follicular phase to get a better ovulation. But again, that has to be found out first that, hey, you have a problem with how low your estrogen is in the follicular phase. You're not going to generate the appropriate growth in a dominant follicle to actually generate an egg that's appropriate in size to fertilize. So that kind of goes back to, you got to measure.
Yeah.
But across the board, vitamin D, omega-3s, even some melatonin, as far as, like a 1 or 3 milligram sustained release, can really be helpful for the antioxidant profile in the ovarian cells. Something
oral
else.
It's like the big thing right now is like oral, or it's like rectal, or it's like,
I mean, they're all going to be good. Yeah. If you're going to go high dose 50 mgs in the butt, I mean, that's a hard night of sleep. But yeah, just an oral kind of sustained release, sublingual, or even just a dissolvable tablet can be really nice. The other supplements I think that I recommended in there was a good prenatal. So making sure that, from an iron perspective and looking at hemoglobin and making sure that if you do get pregnant, you have enough resource to actually donate to making a new being, along with B12 and folate and the other B vitamins are going to be important for methylation and DNA repair and synthesis too. I'm trying to think if there's any kind of big, for someone who's insulin resistant, inositol can be super helpful, as well as metformin and maybe even berberine as far as like actually controlling blood sugar issues. Again, that kind of funnels into
a little gassy. Sometimes people get real gassy.
Well, yeah, you got to titrate it really slowly over a big period of time. But so I think that's a pretty good kind of baseline. And again, everything else beyond that would be more context dependent for the nuance of the individual that's, sitting across from you.
Yeah, for sure. I want to go back to the food really briefly. So it's like remembering that what you said, this thing, which is like preparing the vessel to have a child. And that's just something that I think also is, the reminder about food. And you don't do a ton of nutrition here apart from like advising people. You're not like prepping meals for people, although you are, serving up slate drinks, which now are like in my fridge and your fridge, and protein. So just the reminder, I think, exists to, it's like shop the periphery, right? Or eat the clean foods and try to stay away from processed foods, and understanding that you're preparing a vessel for a child, or you're preparing a vessel for longevity, or you're preparing your vessel for, whatever you don't have to be training for a marathon to take good care of yourself.
For sure.
And you've made it so easy here, just from a time management perspective as well. So it's super cool. Should we talk a little bit about a couple of the toys you have in the world of like, let's just say female health? Some of it is sexual well-being, and some of it is like skin and beauty and things you've incorporated on the outset, because I would say that what is really beautiful about some of the things you have here is like making females feel beautiful on the inside and out. It's like one more thing that you step into, step outside of stress, maybe, right? We're feeling a little bit better out of ourselves, and there's a stress reduction that exists, because you haven't specifically said it, but in a lot of what you're writing about and a lot of what we talk about, it's like the stress management game is everything.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you want to speak to that briefly first, and then maybe we'll talk a little bit about the toys that you and I come over here and we're vibing over toys. I'm like, what about this toy? What about this vaginal insertion device? It's a red light therapy. Let's do it. You're like, high five.
Oh, no, I mean, it's super important. So you want to talk about stress management first. I think so. Okay. So when I'm facilitating conversation around stress management, it's usually within the realm of kind of affective disturbance. So like, what does their emotional life look like, even beyond the stressors of what could be said in terms of, I really want to have a baby, but I can't, and that's stressing me out, right? So that's more of I had an expectation and it's not being met. There's something wrong. I need to blame something. So that's a big part of the disruption that comes from kind of not being able to fulfill an expectation that you put on yourself. And that even kind of brings a bigger societal impact in terms of, women are really kind of pushed right now in this feministic society to go in and do things and kind of, stick it to the expectation that was had at one point to just be a homemaker. And, I think it's been great to have this push and to have women that are really kind of filling these roles that couldn't really be done without that feminine side. And I think it's really important. And it's been great to see, even with my practice, the kinds of women that come in and, they're just super, super successful. I think where that's actually become a problem though is that they latch onto this idea that that's what they have to do and they don't actually get to choose. So from an egalitarian perspective, I want to kind of bridge this gap of saying you can do whatever you want to do. And if being a mom and being a homemaker is what you want to do, there's nothing wrong with that. And so I think, again, even with the guys, like I have a lot of men that, took a trajectory that they thought was going to make them happy and super successful and make money and make themselves a better potential mate for somebody, to the point where they've, kind of sacrificed the ability to pursue what they wanted to get from it by just being inundated with what they've done. And so in the same token, one of my biggest outreaches is to have people understand why they're doing what they're doing. And the earlier you can do that, the better, because there's more time to course correct. When I have someone that has, gotten to the age of 40 and they're like, I really want to have a kid now. I'm ready. And we have to have that conversation of, okay, well, why did you choose to delay up to this point? And kind of getting an understanding of what their mental health was like in making the decision, first off, not to have a child until they're quote unquote ready. And then kind of figuring out, well, they didn't really want one at the time, but as the maternal instincts have kind of kicked in and desire to care for things, maybe they've had a couple dogs or a cat or a partner that really wanted a kid and they kind of thought they'd saw that future, but they get to the point where they're like, now it's time for me to do this thing. And the conversation around it can still happen, but it's going to be a lot harder. And really kind of boiling it down to, you can't feel guilt and shame about not doing that before this point. Whenever there's a conversation around this kind of agency and fertility and kind of feeling like you are bestowed this kind of biological gift to carry a child eventually, it kind of sinks in, especially when they've gotten the itch out to do all the things that they thought they wanted to do. So now I can kind of take a step back and see, okay, here's where I want my future to be. Here's where I want this to be. But you can't reverse time in that spectrum. So my goal right now is to really help everyone understand, and this is what I kind of wrote in that newsletter, like, if you don't know you want to have a kid, freeze an egg or freeze, just have this procedure done. So there's never the thing in the back of your mind that says, I'm going to be dependent on my own ovarian production of eggs at one point. And I want to make sure that if I get the opportunity to have a partner that I'm ready to have a baby with, that all I have to focus is on my uterine health and not the actual machinery upstream of that. But helping through the lens of mental health with different conditions like anxiety and depression and PTSD and, all these different, traumas that can really impact someone's stress resiliency and stress management later on in life. That's what we do with just communication and the transcranial magnet and ketamine therapy and everything that can kind of help peel back these layers of what is getting in the way of other expectations that kind of augment the disturbance of kind of what you're trying to do at that point in time. I
love that you're being so thoughtful about the way that you're speaking, which you always do. Not just because we're like on camera, but it's also like the most important, it like chokes me up to say like the most important piece of advice you're giving is this one.
Yeah.
Because as a woman in my 40s, I really understand that it's like freeze an egg or freeze an embryo if you need to, because you just don't know, Yeah. And of course, it's like my shit that's coming up a little because you don't know, because I would say right now, I still don't know if I want to have a kid.
Yeah.
But the reality is, I think society, maybe you disagree, but the medical community is telling us now, like anything over 40 is a geriatric pregnancy. There's no way that you can get, like, you're starting to be 35, 36. Donor eggs only can come in a package that's like under 30. There's a lot of things that are out there that I think are, as medicine does quite often, it's like takes 20 years to catch up. But that also doesn't mean that you can be like 55, no problem, make your own egg and have a baby, right? There's going to be a hard line in the sand. And so it is so important. My opinion, and I also think this is what you're saying out loud, is if you don't know, you don't know. And people will say, it costs so much money and it does all the things. It's like, and the day that you turn 55 and you're like, oh, I could have been a single mom right now or have the thing, like plenty of women are still having implantation successfully or surrogacy or whatever. Mm-hmm. And there's a really big, no one ever talked to me about that, right? I was with a partner for years who didn't want to have children. So that was like a piece of it as well, that I assumed I'm going to spend my life with this person. So we'll get a dog or a cat or whatever you do.
Yeah.
But also like it goes back to autonomy, and it goes back to, you know, there's a bit of a stance you take in the newsletter. I would flip through the pages and try to find it. But you really say, you know, we are on this planet for a lot of different reasons. But the reality is like we're on this planet to be healthy and be functional in a way that we can reproduce, that we can share, you know, with the next generation by creating offspring. And that's an innate nature of humankind, right? That is like probably why this business is around existence, you know, that, and I think you having children and the way that you bring sort of family to the table and in your facility and just the way you speak about it is such a beautiful, it's a note to that. It's a nod to that. And so I'm just repeating some of what you said and adding my own color to it, because I think it's something that there's no way you know it at 25. Like, and it's like, if you're watching at 25, like blood tests, start figuring out what's going on and say, hey, kid sounds crazy. That's a lot of work. That's a lot of money. Sure, it is. And you need to be, now we have the tools and the technology to be able to, like the bionic man, right? We can rebuild it. We can take an egg out of a woman. We can make it an embryo. We can do all the things. I think the last shout out I will say, this is not about my personal story, but it's just, you know, there were years I went to fertility clinics where they said, well, just, you can go pick out of a book. I didn't have a partner at the time. You can go pick out of a book this, you know, Tony or Sven or whatever, right? Just like you pick out a picture and a demographic and you want, you know, any style or type of, and I thought to myself, that's so impersonal. It's so impersonal. And you know what? It's also like, at some point you might want to have a child, and that's the way the world works. That's the way science works or physiology works. There has to be sperm that fertilizes the egg and that you make a baby. And if it's not, you know, if there's enough love in one person, and this is also for like gay couples or whatever, right? If there's enough love in a couple or a single person that really wants to do that amazing thing, the gift of being a parent to the world, because I'm sure you can attest and maybe you can speak, that to me is like, you know, that's a beautiful opportunity. Maybe the aunt or the uncle role is for you, but like there's still ability. You know, I have a friend of mine who's like, I have embryos in the freezer. Like, you don't have to go get them fertilized if you want. I got extra.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah.
So there's other ways to sort of slice it. And so I think I just want to. I don't know if you have commentary on that. I just want to highlight what you just said, because there'll be a line in the sand moment, right?
No,
and there's adoption. There's other avenues, but just giving yourself ample opportunity if you think maybe 1% of you might want to be a parent. And almost, I want to say, even if you think probably not.
Yeah. Well, and again, if you really ask someone why they do or really don't want to have a kid, like the reasons are kind of a dime a dozen. I mean, it's, you know, the world's a bad place. I don't want to bring someone else into it. You know, there's kind of these lame excuses for really not wanting to, or, you know, really, I mean, there's selfish reasons. It's not to say that everyone should have a child, right?
Totally.
It's more so to say that there's a maternal instinct that every woman has, and some to a less degree than others, but there's a need intrinsically, biologically, to care for things. And that's why women like to go into professions like nursing or healthcare, because they have the intrinsic desire to take something and to nurse it and to be, you know, helpful. And that's a craving that actually stimulates forward progress in a woman's life. And I think that once chasing everything else externally kind of goes away, there's that intrinsic demand to have something to care for. And that's this maternal drive. And it's not to say that, you know, you can't have a dog and have the same kind of relationship, but there is this development process of having something that's significantly more important than yourself and devoting time and effort into not just helping it grow, but like imparting your values and your wisdom and your life experience into how this next generation is going to show up. And, you know, for what better reason than the world's a shitty place than to raise something that's going to make it better.
Yeah.
And so there's this level of legacy that I think people just don't really give appropriate credence to, in the same line where, you know, if they succumb to being this homemaker, that they've somehow failed in this mission of feminism. So really, when I see women now, we're doing ketamine or doing something else that's just kind of unraveling what they thought they wanted and where they really are and where they want to be, and how there's no going back. So helping them kind of understand that, you know, shame is not going to be a positive feeling. It's not a positive affect. Guilt is not a positive affect. So helping get through and grieving, really, I mean, it's a grief process. Like, you have to let go of this concept of what you thought you could have, when really it's just, either such a low chance. So if it does happen, awesome. But again, not expecting it to happen, but hoping that it will. So the deviation from expectation to hope is a big deal. And then the second point, and this kind of goes into kind of what a definition of love would be, but when you have, and we're as social animals kind of develop this different strategy to care for offspring that takes 18 to 20 years to actually get the hell out of your house. But, the development of, passion to pursue a relationship and have that kind of fire that brings you together, and then to develop intimacy, which is that desire to share and be with another person, and then to level on top of that commitment, right? This kind of trifecta of what makes a relationship full of love. And it's that commitment piece that really gets ingrained by the offspring and the legacy. And it's really hard to maintain a relationship over a long period of time without that commitment aspect that really gets ingrained by having something that pulls both of you together in a perfect kind of 50-50 split. And so, of course, you can have the single motherhood aspect or the single fatherhood aspect, but no one's going to say that's better than having two.
Well, even if it takes a village, even if it's you and your bestie or something,
for
there's
sure.
a commitment in some level, yeah.
And then they're also getting the feedback of what a relationship looks like that they need to model going forward.
Yeah.
So this even goes back to, if you have a couple that's fighting all the time, it really just doesn't get along. Like they don't have that passion or intimacy, but they're just kind of empty love with just commitment. Like that's also not a great strategy for developing offspring that's going to see that as the optimal strategy for, a relationship and then mimic that going forward. Now, it takes a very conscious attitude to unroot that, especially if the parents aren't conscious of it in the beginning anyway. So in some ways, single parenting might be a better option because, relationships are not
always perfect.
The most fertile ground for, what should be.
Yeah. Cool. We digressed a little, but not really, because that's super fucking important. So let's lighten the mood and let's wrap up on some fun biohacks and some of the toys you have here. And then one of the first conversations we had early on was, I was like, do you know about the BFit intravaginal red light therapy? And you were like, I got 6 boxes in the back room.
They're flying off the shelves.
Yeah, just finding out, sure, sexual well-being. I brought you a Yarlap to look at today. I was like, check out the Yarlap before I use it. Which is like an intravaginal stimulation device for urinary incontinence. And I have a lot of women who show up to me, they're doing fitness and they're working on their body, their physique, their mind, their well-being. And they're like, I have to wear black pants to the gym now because postpartum, or even in many cases not. I jump up and down in my 30s, in my 50s, whatever. And I'm peeing myself a little, which is, it ain't cute.
Yeah.
So, just some of the things interior and exterior that you've been bringing into the space that you're loving or seeing good results from or are empowering. I mean, you wouldn't know, but sometimes I'm I have an intravaginal red light device. I am empowered.
Yeah.
I feel confident,
It's an interesting conversation, especially with that device in particular, because
it's huge.
Because
it's big.
It is. And I mean, it's almost intimidating because, I show it to my postmenopausal population. They give me these eyes and it's me too. It's not a woman talking to you about, intravaginal therapy for, atrophic vaginitis. But the nice thing is usually it's a conversation that happens after the hormone replacement conversation happens. Yeah. So we talk about vaginal dryness. We talk about, painful sex. We talk about urinary incontinence. So those 3 things kind of go in line with just estrogen withdrawal. And so getting them on a hormone replacement therapy that's going to invigorate that tissue again, get them more curious about what else I can do to augment my sexual life and my relationship. Because, typically I'm also treating their husbands and, they're back up to feeling 30 or 40 years old again. And obviously that makes the problem if, the receptive individual on the other side is not as receptive. So there's kind of a drive to say, everything is going so well, but now there's this one aspect of my life that's just not as good as it was, and I would like it to be better. What can we do? And so that's where interventions like PT-141 or bremelanotide or different, things like, baby Cialis for women too. On the flip side, sometimes people are taking medications that inhibit their sexual drive motivations, which is, the antidepressant class or even opioids for chronic pain management. So having that conversation around, okay, you have this braking system where, you might have the desire, but you can't have an orgasm, right? Or, might be vice versa. So then interjecting with something like the VFit, which is, obviously going to promote better health and function of the vagina in general, but also increase sensitivity and make sure that the quality is better. And it's kind of a no-brainer. I mean, typically it's somewhat of a hard sell from the price perspective, but again, like I want people to feel better. And so until I get enough freebies out there where people are like, yes, this is totally worth it, I love it, then I'll have more people to kind of have as my test subjects to say, these women tried it, they loved it, and I feel more confident to actually like say, here's what the price is and buy it.
And I just had a girlfriend who was like postpartum and she's like, I'm not feeling sexy. And I have a young client that just went through a gnarly divorce. Who's like, I need a break for a year, but I also like never really use toys. And I don't know. And it's like a very different thing when your medical practitioner or your coach says, go get this.
Yeah.
And then you're like, but I'm required to do it by my coach. Thank you very much. It's like when I first got the VFit like 7 years ago, Susan Bratton raffled one off. So she's like a sex therapist, who she is. And she raffled one off and I won it. And you never saw someone run to the front of the room as fast as I did. And then I like called my mom, took a photo and said, I'm going to post this on social media. I just want to let you know because all your friends will like see it. Her friends follow me. And I'm like, so I just want to be okay with it, posting like, I had to ask my mom for permission because there's still conservatism that exists. But I think it's beautiful that you come in a male meat suit. Cool. And you can say, this can work for you. This can help, right? That makes well, and across the board, like every tissue, if you don't use it, you lose it. And people tend to think, well, okay, I'm not interested in sex, or I'm divorced, or, other issues kind of happen where they're just not interested in upkeep of the vaginal tissue. But, you're not thinking about the incontinence. You're not thinking about the pelvic musculature. You're not thinking about the UTI risk, right? You're not thinking about anything that kind of happens when that tissue just starts to get atrophied. And once people, it can kind of like a frog in boiling water situation, like it happens over time where you just kind of forget what it was like to have a pelvic floor that was strong and tight. And obviously, even if it's not getting used from a sexual perspective, it's important for the vitality of the organism to have, again, the upkeep of a reproductive fitness. And so it kind of falls in line with that same, demographic. Yeah, and fitness across the board and breathing, your pelvic floor, all of it, weight training, all of it. Yeah. Cool. Anything else that's like rocking your world right now that you brought in here that you're like, wow, women are really digging this? I want to say the green laser, but like more men are using it than women maybe. Yeah, it's funny. The green laser it's a fun thing to have, but I'm not incredibly impressed with it, which is kind of why it's not at the forefront of what I'm telling people to do. But honestly, the ARX machines have been kind of the game changer for a lot of women because they would go and do the classes and they would go and feel like they were getting the workout that would give them the benefits they wanted as far as their physique goes. And it just doesn't, right? They're going to these classes 4 or 5 days a week. They're doing Orange Theory. They're doing all these different... doing like 10-pound pink dumbbells or whatever. Yeah. And they're doing weights, right? So when I ask them, do you resistance train? Like, yeah, I do resistance training with my, 10 or 15 pounds and some do kettlebells. But still, it's like getting away from the high rep, high intensity, like sweat and you feel like you burn a lot of calories. Like it's getting away from that and going into the 3 to 5 rep range. It's going time under tension. It's getting muscular force output. It's focusing on the things that aren't as sexy in terms of you just feel, even though you do feel really gassed after the ARX machine, but they don't think of it that way. They think of the bodybuilders that go and do all these crazy things. And then they conflate that with, oh, I'm going to look like a bodybuilder. And that's just not the case. And so now when they come and do the machines, they're like, I'm done in 20 minutes. I can go and make this class and this class if I want to, but I don't have to. So they can do they can participate in their exercise classes as an enjoyment, but not feel like they have to extract benefit from it. So they can have more of just a fun time going. And then, a lot of women, especially in their adult life, they have kids, they're taking them to their sporting matches and all these different things. They can't work out as often. And so even if they have the summer to be on point, as soon as the semester rolls around, they got their kids and everything going back in. Again, opportunity cost just goes way out the door when it comes to being able to do something once or twice a week and get and maintain that benefit. Yeah. You're having people come in and use Katsu too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, it's there for them to use. I've done kind of a poor job of explaining like this tool is available. Here's how you use it just because there's not as much time. But, generally speaking, if, one of the guys are out there, they can advise. And also, I feel like the Katsu is a really safe way. It's like blood flow restriction cuffs. I want to say on steroids, but just like really well done. I think this is, I don't know if you see this, but I have, even when I go to the gym, there's like guys that are like tying off their arms and I'm like, yo, Amazon? Yeah. But just like Katsu is a reputation for having like the right pressurization and really can be safe, and you like learn how to do it for yourself. And that tool, I think, along with ARX, just like the one day I did them together, I was like, wow, that's a lot. But like separately, fine, maybe together, I don't know, it's like pretty intense, and also short on time, long on longevity.
Yeah,
that's really cool.
You just feel the pump for days.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah, no, it's intense. It's lovely.
Which is what we're all looking for, by the way. Caleb, Greer, the pump. The women are like, looking at the pump.
They really enjoy it. I'm actually kind of surprised
it does feel
because
good in your skin when you walk out the door.
And again, that's a great point too. Like the blood flow that you get from doing those exercises, it's not just distal to the extremity, it's actual proximal too. So you get this massive increase of vasodilation that brings growth factors and VEGF and all these things that make your skin look a hell of a lot better.
Right. Other hormones too, right? That are like helping
growth hormone and MGF.
Amazing. What's your favorite biohack? I like to always ask that before I close out. Do you have a biohack that's like super rad that you're like, oh, I'm all into it? You're going to say something that's really like earthy probably and low on tech. High on
earthy, walking in the sand with my bare feet, skipping in the flowers and daisies. Let me think, what do I use the most? I actually, the MagnaWave, the PMF has been super, I've been having issues with my knees and tendonitis, and something that really gets in the way of my quality of life is that. And so I hate having my knees hurting, especially after doing, exercise, and I just can't do what I want to do. And so that gets in the way. And then, Freddie brought the MagnaWave to try out, and it's been a substantial improvement in just a short period of time. And all the clients can come by and use it, and they've actually really loved it too. It's been really powerful. So that's really one thing that's kind of entered my Dasein in the last month. That's been a substantial improvement.
You have the blue box here or the black one? The blue one. Yeah, it's good. Strong. It's nice because it's like, you can feel it.
Yeah, no, you definitely feel it. And you feel the pain relief like within minutes.
Yeah. Cool. If you could go back to your 12-year-old self and give yourself advice, which is only like, I think 2 years ago, Doogie Howser. But if you could go back to your 12-year-old self as you are right now, a man with a plan who's organized with a family and just crushing health, not only for himself, but for so many people, what would you tell your 12-year-old self that would just have you step further into your capacity at that age?
Man, it's with my philosophy on free will and the ability to kind of just really take into account that everything that has happened is what happened. There is no kind of like that thought exercise for me is kind of a non-starter solely because if I had changed anything with past relevance, who knows if I would have taken a different trajectory. Like, hey, don't date that girl, or hey, don't do this. It's like, yeah, that was a mistake that kind of manifested in the time, but it worked out. Like everything kind of paid off. And I think if I were to kind of remove the things that caused me the most stress in early life, I wouldn't have grown through it. So I think the resiliency factor and having those little kind of lowercase traumas, like again, they kind of developed to a point where eventually they kind of got in the way, but being aware and able to kind of tie that back to a certain event and then deal with it now has been the best way to actually kind of facilitate growth and that post-traumatic growth mindset rather than distress. So I would say do exactly what you're going to do.
That's the first. Everyone's answered that question and no one said, I would say nothing. And that's actually pretty, it's like, I don't know if it's a little bit of the stoicism of you or a little bit of the...
It's like hands off, man. Do your thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it's all happening for you in the course of events, right?
Yeah.
It's like whatever's showing up is showing up in your best interest. Just keep the faith. Cool. What a legend you are, Thank you so much for serving the community in the way that you do. It means a lot to all of us. I hope people are telling you that enough. And if they're not, just look at them. Everyone's walking out of here like buff, horny, ready to go, pregnant, doing the biggest things in their careers ever, willing to take chances, and minimum effective dose is changing their lives. And I super appreciate you. And thanks for sitting down with me.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate you as well.